And now I will go around and do the room. If you could introduce yourself and say what committee or otherwise your authority is on the committee. So going in order, I will start with you, Miss Bill Kameza.
Thank you. So Bill Kameza, and I'm representing Natural Resources Commission.
Thank you, Bill. Eve.
Eve Eisenberg. I'm a select board appointee, and you might want to say the date again, Burton.
Did I say October 8th,
There you
2024? Go. Okay. Sorry, I literally just ran in the door from dropping a kid off at their psych dinner and trying to get dinner on the table. Okay. Ed.
Edward Larner, representing housing from the Concord Housing Authority.
Thank you, Ed. Paul.
Paul Bone, Recreation Commission appointee.
Sue.
Sue Felshen, Planning Board appointee.
Thank you. And John.
John Kratzley, a Select Board appointee.
Thank you. And I'm Burton Flint, Select Board appointee. We have 7, which is a quorum. And so now we are kicking off, having had our site visits a couple of weeks ago, we're kicking off our first round of reviews with the applicants. I believe, Nate, you are on, as I recall from looking at the agenda earlier today, I don't have it in front of me, but I believe you are on first, and you got 20 minutes to provide us with information about your project, filling in any gaps you feel may have been left from the information you provided us when we met with you in the library. And so with that, I will give you the floor.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you all for having me. I am Nate Smith. I'm the town archivist, and I have been the town archivist for about 5 years. I think this is my third application before you all. In the past, we have done, am I allowed to share, Ann, my presentation? I think I am. Let's get that up for you. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. So, yeah, so in the past, we have done some very specific records preservation, and this is a more of a larger collection, and we're looking at, if you approve the application, we're looking to fund the preservation and digitization of our 18th century assessor's records, and this is spanning the years 1770 to 1795. You can see here on the first slide, this is just sort of the example of a cover page of one of them. Interestingly, they called them quarters, but there was only the north, the south, and the east at this time in town. So for most years, there's a north book, a south book, and an east book, but they called them the quarters for whatever reason. So these are tax records, which is, can sometimes immediately trigger boring to some people. But I think, and I'll show you on the second slide here, there is some research value here. So this is what the inside of an assessor's book from this era looks like. And it includes basically everything that you were taxed on for that year. So I don't know if you guys can see my mouse, but the first category is polls. So that's the poll tax. Then real estate, oxen, cows, horses, swine, sheep, and that's slaves. Then money and trading stock, and a couple that I can't make, personal estate. So they vary a little bit from year to year. I'm not an expert in 18th century bookkeeping, but there is a lot of information. These are dense records. And one of the reasons that I'm proposing to do sort of a wide swath of the 25 years is because I think a lot of the value is in comparison, right? What changes year to year? Who moves into town? Who moves out of town? How do their fortunes rise and fall? Things like that. We've seen some research into these records, but I really think it's just the tip of the iceberg. I put some items here as potential research topics, landowners and taxpayers in a given year, the economics of town year to year, enslaved peoples and slave ownership, and then of course genealogy is always anything that lists the people who lived or worked in town. People who are their ancestors are interested in that type of record. So a little bit about the condition. I'm going to go back to this first page. You can see they're mostly threaded together. The binding is a strand or two. And then you can see down here on the bottom right, there's some discoloration. That's former, it's not active mold, but that is likely from mold damage from at some point. We believe these were stored in the townhouse basement for several years before they were moved over to the library and their current home. So there is some work to do there. What we did when we put together the proposal, we worked with the vendor, Northeast Document Conservation Center, who we worked with before and have an excellent reputation. And we basically, what I told them, I was like, we want them repaired without damaging them further. You know, we don't want to take any risks, but we want them repaired enough that we can digitize them, because that's really the value we can get out of this. Is not only can we preserve the paper, but we can then create a digital version that people can, one, access from anywhere, and two, access without damaging the paper anymore. No, like we don't want to touch the paper again, essentially, so that we can preserve these as long as possible. So just going through, so the proposed preservation actions from our vendor are to disbind and remove fasteners. Most of them, like I said, have the thread sewn as the binding. Some of them, there are a few that have metal fasteners, which are particularly bad for paper. So those will be removed. They will lightly humidify and flatten any major creases. What they tend to do is, if there's a crease that doesn't impact reading it, they won't mess with it. But if there's a crease that covers a row or a category and they can flatten it without damaging it, they will flatten it. They will do some minor cleaning, again, if it impacts the legibility of the document, and then mend some tears. They use what's called Japanese paper, which is a really low impact mending product. And then once that is all done, they will digital image them and provide us with high quality digital images that we can then put on our digital repository for anyone to access. So that is really all I had to present. I am open to questions. I know one question that came up at the site visit that I couldn't answer was, what was the population of Concord around this time? And best estimates are around 1,400 in 1775 from what I could gather. So the most recent official census was back in 1763. So it was a little outdated, but there's, you know, people have done some extrapolation, and that was the number that I saw. So any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Well, I'll kick it off. Just get things started. I love this project. You say it's boring because it's tax records, but what this reminds me of is, you know, William the Conqueror's Domesday Book, which is now like, you know, the ultimate historical document of England in 1066, which is essentially the tax records. I guess my question is, as you're looking at this, and now this is, as you mentioned, it's a third, I think, the application you've had come through, all of which have been really interesting documents. How are you prioritizing? You know, I've got to imagine there's a lot of really great historical documents. How are you prioritizing these things? So in terms of this being the thing that we should be focused on now and spending money on now? Yeah,
so there's kind of two things I gauge. One is the interest level from researchers, and one is the condition of the documents. So you know, it's kind of a balance between those two. I want to preserve everything, right? Like I want to preserve every record we have, from the smallest receipt to you know, something like this. But you have to prioritize and you have to pick. And these have seen more interest of late, particularly with the research into enslaved peoples. I think I mentioned at the site visit, but I'll mention for anyone who wasn't there, or just to reiterate, we had a couple of people from Harvard who were researching the history of their founders, and some of the Harvard founders owned land and paid taxes in Concord, so they were seeing if they owned slaves. That was one particular instance. Beth Van Duzer, who many of you may know, has used these records in some of her soldier research to figure out who lived here and who may have participated in the Concord fight and things like that. So those are just a couple examples that come to mind, but I've seen that there's more, you know, probably a dozen or so requests in the last year to access these records.
These particular records, yeah.
Yeah, and so that was that, and then the condition of these, you know, they're not rapidly deteriorating. You know, we could do this project in 5 years and probably not have lost much, but I kind of wanted to capitalize on the interest level, and they clearly do need some love. And if the interest level increases, I want to provide that digital access point rather than worry about them deteriorating further from access.
Great.
I think I did mention we do have the microfilm. but a lot of you know, it's just harder to access, and you still have to be physically in the library to access it.
Okay, thanks, Nate. That was very helpful. I'll now go in order that I saw the hands come up. So Eve, you've got a question.
Yeah, thanks, Nate. I love this project, and your application is very thorough and excellent letters at the back. All good. I have one question out of curiosity, which is, you know, just in evidence the fact that we have microfiche. What happens to these documents after you've done the preservation actions that are up on our screen right now that are presumably to help you digitize them better? Do they go and get like vacuum sealed somewhere, or are they like somehow frozen so they don't deteriorate further for the you know, the next round of whatever technology is coming that you know is beyond the digitation imaging that we've got now, the digital imaging technology?
Yeah, so
What
that's
happens to them?
great
Do they get
question.
bound?
So actually, so paper likes to breathe. That is one thing about paper that, you know, we try not to encapsulate it because it does need some air or it gets too brittle. It basically dries out. So the best practice right now is we use what's called interleaving paper. So we will put that paper in between each document so that they're not touching. And then we put them in acid-free folders, in acid-free boxes, and they live in the shelf in our climate-controlled vault that we share with the library. And that is sort of following best practices of storing any archival records, but particularly archival records of this era and this type of paper and this type of ink. You know, if some other housing is recommended or comes along that is better to store these, we would certainly entertain that. But that is still sort of the best way to store paper at this time.
That's great, Nate. Thank you. And I just have one quick other question. You mentioned at the beginning of your presentation that this is the third project that you've asked for CPC funding for. Do you have just a general sense of where those other two projects are at this time? Like, are you getting backed up over there?
No, we're doing all right. So the first year we did some water and sewer maps, which were very specific, but they were damaged. So those were high priority because we were worried about losing them. So those are digital. Unfortunately, the file size is really massive. So I have sent them to people who have been interested, but it's hard. I need to do a conversion to get those posted publicly. But those came through, you know, within the budget, and they look great, and they're preserved, and those got a new housing that is stored, and they're stored at the library. The last year's project is the Declaration of Independence and the covenant of non-importation covenant, and that is in process. So we ran into a little paperwork backup with that one, where we had to get it added to we had to get it appraised and then added to the town's insurance. We had the appraiser come out a couple weeks ago. We have not received the appraisal. Once we do, it'll be added to the insurance, and then we'll create a transportation plan to get it up to the vendor to be treated. So that should still be completed, I would say, end of the calendar year. So we are moving along with those projects. This one, because it is a bigger volume of material, is, I think in my timeline, is a little more extended. So we're looking at, you know, if it was awarded next July, we would probably see the records. We see the project finished and back, you know, February, March timeframe next year. But it would probably be done in stages because it is a more voluminous collection. But that's kind of where we're at with the three projects.
Thank you.
Okay, John, I saw you had your hand up. Did you take that down, or?
I must have fallen down.
Okay. I
Shall
think
I
you
go
were
ahead?
next, John. Yes, please.
Yeah. I'm just curious how they're all organized, and what the total number of pages might be. For example, just using the 1774 North Brook, that's one little volume, so to speak. And so are there 3 or 4 bound volumes each year? How does it all?
Yes.
How do you, what's the total sort of I don't know. What's the total collection?
Yes, let me see if I can find the exact number for you. So the vendor estimated at 141 pamphlets for the 25 years. So that's roughly a little more than 3 a year. No, yeah, I guess almost, yeah, more than that. So yeah, it varies through the year. So I picked 1775 and 1774 for my pictures. they get larger as you get closer to 1790, just because there are more people in town, there are more people paying taxes, essentially. So the very early ones, yes, there's three, sometimes there's a fourth summary book that includes everyone and the taxes they paid. So it just, I don't know, I don't particularly know either the bookkeeping reason or why that was convenient for them to have, maybe just to sum it all up. But there's usually, 3, 4, 5 books per year, and then each one has, I would say, probably 10 to a dozen pages. I think if I remember correctly, the South Quarter was the smallest at this time. So that one tends to be about half the size of the others. But there is some variety year to year, and then the binding, you may have seen at the site visit, like in 1788 maybe, they're using newspaper as the binding. That's sort of the cover and front is a newspaper. So yeah, the composition it changes a little, and the volume definitely increases as the years go on in terms of page count. But yeah, 141 total pamphlets were what we sent to the vendor.
Thank you.
Yep.
Next, Paul, I believe you had your hand up next.
Yeah, hi Nate. So I find the series of projects really fascinating. So I'm wondering what your outreach strategy is. I think we do have a requirement in the application for outreach, and that varies from project to project what actually that means. And the reason why I bring that up is not only it's a requirement, but I was on a hike with one of my neighbors, and he was asking me, well, what do I do in town? I said, I'm a member of the CPC, and what do? We fund projects like what? Well, Nate is Smith at the library is archiving these historical documents. Oh, really? Like what? And I said, well, like a copy of the Declaration of Independence. And he said, what? Holy cow, we have a copy of the Declaration of Independence? So I'm just wondering, how much of the public is aware of these documents and what you're doing, and I think it'd be worthwhile thinking of an outreach strategy for a variety of reasons. So I just want to bring that up.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. It's definitely something I would like to do more of. It has, it's one of those things that's always on the list, but it's never the top priority. But I think, especially with the amount of funding requested this year, there's an expectation, and I think a reasonable expectation, that there would be some outreach done. So one thing, particularly with the Declaration of Independence, we are planning an exhibit at the library for April 19th, a combination of the town archives and special collections at the library. So we will be doing outreach around that, hopefully probably right around the start of the year. And we're hoping to put the exhibit together by the end of December. So that piece will be included in that, and I will certainly, it'll be noted that the reproduction and the preservation was funded by the CPC on that. I tend to add things to my webpage, which is somewhat hidden in a corner of the concordma.gov webpage, which is not a great place, but at least it's somewhere searchable. And then when projects like this finish, like for instance, I will add it to the I think it's called the weekly operations report that the town manager sends out, which does get a lot of eyeballs on it. But I take your point, and I think there's definitely some room for improvement with outreach with these projects.
Yeah, the library has I think a weekly newsletter that goes out. You might want to put a little spot in there from time to time on that.
Yeah, we have collaborated with them on a couple things, and it's been in there, but there's a lot of great stuff in the town archives, and I would love to include it more often.
Sure. Thanks.
Thank you.
Nate, on that point, is there any collaboration with like the Concord Museum, which might have more people thinking about, going through their doors, thinking about looking at historical documents?
That's a great question. We met with them at the beginning of the April 19th planning, and they borrowed some of the special collections material and used some of my digital items. But we haven't had any conversations with them recently. It's probably worth us, having another meeting with them and kind of talking about through April 19th in particular for this year, and then kind of a bigger, longer term strategy. We do, I would say me and Anka in special collections, we meet with them 2 or 3 times a year and kind of talk through how we can support each other or help each other. But it definitely it could be more frequent.
Yeah, I mean, I do just second what Paul's saying. His anecdote about going on a hike with somebody and asking about the CPC. I love telling people about sort of the special places we get to see when we do our walkarounds, and going into the basement and seeing what Anka has back in that room is just really, it's one of my favorite parts of being on the committee and living in Concord, when you see we've got these amazing resources that people have dedicated to preserving and holding. And it does seem it's a little bit of a town secret, right? I mean, I think there's a lot of people in town who know about some of the great things that the Library Corporation holds and that the town holds, but putting that, on the town library website, in terms of the historical documents, I think would be really, really neat, and it would be a good return on the investment from the CPC,
Yeah,
so that people
totally.
see what they're
No.
doing. Yeah,
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me, and
Um,
I can definitely work on that.
that would be great. Bill, you've had your hand raised. It's down now, but
I did, but I put it down because my question was really like John's about the volume. But I did have one more, a little thing, which is just for trivial, but it was interesting. Yeah, is the money that's shown, the currency, is that in British pounds? And then later on, does it switch over to something else in the late 1700s? Do you know?
I believe throughout this period through 1790, they still use pounds through the entirety of it. I could look at the last one and see, but it is primarily
curious.
pounds from the notation that I've seen.
Okay.
okay. Well, Nate, thank you very much for your time and the additional information, and for as Eve pointed out, a very well done application. We appreciate that very much. With that, we're now through 20 minutes, which is what allocate. So if I would move to our next presenter, and Nate, unless you have any closing remarks,
Just
final
thank you for
comments?
your time and consideration. I really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. And with that, again, we appreciate your time here this evening. With that, I will move to Keith Bergman, who is our next presenter, talking about the application from the Concord Affordable Housing Trust.
Thanks very much, Keith Bergman, Chair of the Concord Municipal Affordable Housing Trust, and I'm going to share my screen and turn on. Can you see that all right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Yep.
Good. All right. Well, first, let me thank the Community Preservation Committee for the total $1.54 million in CPA funds that you've awarded to the trust thus far in fiscal years 24 and 25. We're greatly appreciative. In fact, we've used all of those funds already to advance the Housing Production Plan priority production projects. So for fiscal year 2026, we're requesting $740,000 to continue those efforts. The trust application is supported by the Concord Housing Authority, the Concord Housing Development Corporation, and the Concord Housing Foundation, whose letters of support you have. Our request is for $500,000 in FY26 CPA funds. That's the amount you awarded to us for FY25. And we're also requesting that the $240,000 in FY21 CPA funds that was not needed by the Housing Authority for the Giroux house at 367 Com Ave also be transferred to the trust. And just as you had done with the $1 million in unused Christopher Heights funds back in fiscal 24, we would like this $240,000 to continue to be used for housing purposes as well. Our total project budget, as you see here, is $2.75 million for fiscal years 25 and 26. This includes the trust's current uncommitted fund balance of $1.48 million, plus $500,000 in town ARPA funds, which were being awarded later this year. The trust requests that the $740,000 be for community housing as defined in the CPA Act. And that is, it would benefit households earning up to 100% of area median income. Previously, your awards to us have been limited to 80% of AMI, so that the units created would be added to the subsidized housing inventory. But Concord is now above its 10% goal under Chapter 40B. And the Select Board, and mindful of that, the Select Board has adopted an FY 2025 goal to diversify the town's housing stock, including workforce housing. As shown here, Concord's SHI fell below 10% to 9.97 when the 2020 US Census figures kicked in the summer of 2023. Since then, the SHI has risen to 12.81%. That's where it is now. From 3 individual units that were added, plus all 201 units from the Novo Riverside Commons 40B. If the thorough 40B's 237 units are also approved, the SHI would reach 16.12%, and that's projected by fiscal year's end. But as this chart shows, 60% of the total countable units that would be the result would be market rate, with only 40% of those units being affordable. So there's more work to do in a community where many who work here still cannot afford to live here. As we build on the Select Board's FY25 goal for the town to diversify its housing stock, we have a baseline to work from. This represents data compiled by Regional Housing Service Office Director Liz Rust, indicating that when the thorough 40B is approved, Concord would have 517 total units restricted at some level between 50 and 150% of AMI. Now, those 517 would only constitute 7.21% of Concord's total year-round housing stock, so below 10%. And there are 471 of those units that would be countable on the SHI, and 46 are not. And among the 46 not countable are 14 units that are already restricted at 100% of AMI as community housing, plus another 22 that are restricted at slightly higher levels from 110 to 150% of AMI. And while adding units above 80% does not increase the SHI count, it does expand housing opportunities here. The Housing Production Plan, which was unanimously approved by the Select Board and Planning Board in 2022, remains the town's guiding policy document on affordable housing. The Concord Housing Roundtable, comprised of 7 boards, including the CPC, is collectively charged with coordinating implementation of the 24 strategies in that plan. Our focus is not just on how funds are spent to address housing needs, but also on what regulatory measures should be enacted for the market to produce units. And Roundtable partners were early supporters of MBTA community zoning, a bylaw which is currently in effect in Concord, which requires 20% affordability for projects of 10 or more units. The Concord Housing Roundtable is charged by the Housing Production Plan with coordinating implementation of the plan's strategies. And we're convened quarterly by the Regional Housing Services Office to monitor progress. The 7 roundtable boards are the Select Board, Planning Board, CPC, Concord Housing Authority, Housing Development Corporation, Housing Foundation, and the Trust. The Trust was created by town meeting to act quickly when opportunities arise, if funds are available. And at the August 15th roundtable meeting, the housing groups reached the consensus to support and submit to CPC this application to further fund the Trust. To implement the Housing Production Plan, the Trust last year adopted funding procedures and guidelines for maintaining and periodically updating the list of priority projects and inviting project sponsors to apply for Trust funding on a rolling basis as projects became ready to proceed. Here's a summary of how the Trust has spent its funds thus far. At the top of this table, you see the Trust has received a total of $4.65 million since town meeting began setting aside funds for the Trust in 2019. That includes some $1.54 million in CPA funds. And of the total of 4.6 million, the trust has committed 3.1 million to creators support 63 affordable units and we have a current uncommitted fund balance of 1.48 million. Looking at CPA funds specifically, the trust has committed all of the 1,044,000 awarded to us in FY24 and all of the $500,000 from FY25. From our quarterly reports to CPC, you'll recognize these 4 projects, which were funded with CPA funds. 2 were first submitted to the CPC for your FY25 funding round, but were subsequently withdrawn and were funded instead by the trust in fiscal 24. One of those was $400,000 for CHA, Local Properties LLC's property acquisition program. Those funds went towards the purchase of a market rate condo for $549,000, and that unit was added to the SHI as an affordable rental in July. The second was CHDC's buy down program. Last December, the trust approved $266,000 to add to the $233,000 that the CPC had previously awarded. So that's for a total of $500,000 for this program for CHDC. A third project was the sewer improvement fee for the Novo Riverside Commons 40B's 51 affordable units. The trust used $378,000 in CPA funds towards a total grant of $392,000. Novo's units, all 201 of them, were added to the SHI this past April. Fourth was CHDC's Assabet River Bluff project. The trust is using $500,000 in CPA funds towards a $1 million grant for the construction of the 3 new affordable units, which will be done by Habitat for Humanity of Greater Lowell. And now this $1 million brings the total project cost for Assabet to $2.5 million for 5 affordable units. The trust maintains and updates the priority production list on a periodic basis in coordination with our roundtable partners. This table shows projects advanced in FY24, along with others on our radar screen for fiscal 25 and beyond. They include completion of Assabet River Homes, pre-development for Junction Village in coordination with the plans for the redevelopment of MCI Concord, acquiring the 91B Main Street surplus state property for workforce housing, and continuing to support the work and programs of the Housing Authority and the CHDC. Periodic updating of this priority list means that it will be an iterative process in order to put our funds to work. We'll also monitor any plans the town may develop for surplus properties, including MCI Concord, 2229 Main Street, and the Peabody Middle School. And we'll be alert to opportunities which may arise in the community at large. The trust can act quickly if funding is available, and we're grateful for CPC's support and would welcome your favorable action on this application. Thanks for your consideration, and I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Keith. And that was an excellent review of our support of the trust in the past and the effectiveness of the trust going forward. One of the things that strikes me as you go through the numbers is the return on investment across different projects. So there was one unit of housing created for the Concord Housing Authority for $400,000 over investment versus, paying that sewer connection fee or helping with the sewer connection fee, getting 200 units of housing at that new 40B project. Yeah, thank you. And what it makes me think about is what's different about what we've done with you in the last couple of years is instead of funding specific projects, we're funding the trust, right? And obviously the different projects have gotten if you're looking at maximizing the number of affordable units, right? Very different returns on the particular investments. So I guess I'm wondering, how is the trust prioritizing the way it spends the money? Because it's very expensive to buy one unit of housing, right? And make it and give, say, CHA, a lot of flexibility in what to do with that versus underwriting a 40B, adding a little bit to the 40B. So what's that process like?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'll start by saying that I think the projects that I've gone through here have been ones that were on our radar screen. There was one missing, though, that was on our radar screen at the beginning, and it was the Christopher Heights at Junction Village, for which the trust at one point was asked. I think we had budgeted $1 million toward for which we would get to count 82 affordable assisted living units. We really like the numbers that were with that project, but understand that the economics of the project overall, cost that had ballooned from, I forget what the original figure was. It was somewhere in the maybe, well, I won't guess, but I'll just say the project cost had about doubled over the course.
Yeah, the town's investment in it had about doubled for sure. Yeah.
But and so it was when we were first approached by the town, I think last year, about subsidizing the Novo 40B sewer hookup fee, which the developer had proposed from the outset. We like the numbers because it would allow us to count 51 units for an investment of just under $400,000. At the same time, what the experience we've seen is the per unit costs that have involved a public subsidy range from where that, say, $400,000 is only getting you one unit. That's basically the cost to the trust for the CHA unit that they built. The per unit cost for Assabet River Bluff, which we were committed to from the outset, will ultimately be about $500,000 per unit. And I think we're looking at, if you do one unit at a time, it's probably going to be closer to $550,000 to $600,000. So we're looking at other projects where the money might go further. Among those is acquiring the 91B surplus state property, and for which we hope, I know Kerry LaFleur hopes that we can get 6 units out of that. The market value, for the appraised value, I should say, for the property is $600,000 for the lot. And so if we could have our funds to acquire it go towards 4 units, 4 to 6 units, that would give us a higher figure. None of these are, or few of these are total project costs that we're looking at. Yeah. We subsidize parts of the program, but where I have to say, my bias is where our funds can help trigger or leverage more units rather than just one would be how I would hope that we could be spending the funds, because I think the total budget we're laying out here, 2.7 million, beyond getting additional perhaps annual appropriations from CPC, maybe at whatever level you're willing. Let's say $500,000, for example. That probably would be the only source of funding that we'd have. And so if we only have the kind of money that we've got now, we need to be judicious in trying to get the most per unit that we can.
Okay.
So I think that's how I'm looking at it.
Okay, thank you for that response. Mindful of our time, Paul, you're next had your hand up.
Yeah. Hi, Keith. I want to return to the Novo sewer improvement fee a little bit. And I asked the question only in terms of how the trust funds may be used in the future. I did not attend all the zoning board of appeals discussions on that. Can you give me a little, it seems like we subsidized a private project, probably because it was leveraging a lot of units to your strategy. Can you give me a little history on that, and if that's sort of, I'll call it subsidy, maybe might be a target for housing trust funds in the future?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'll say my own experience from, and I'll go back to 17 years as town manager in Provincetown, where we first accepted the Community Preservation Act back in 2003. We were that town approached subsidies for affordable housing projects as something that we wanted to do to encourage the projects themselves. And so the idea of using trust funds, back then it was just CPA funds, to help offset the cost of an affordable housing development was something that we thought was important, and it's something that I do think that many housing trusts across the Commonwealth are doing. With respect to the specifics of the Novo 40B, the trust had recommended to the select board during the very preliminary stage, when there was first a letter from Mass Housing saying that there was an entity that would be submitting an application if they pass muster. We encouraged the select board to try to create a situation where you could negotiate with the developer to get more concessions out of them to make the project better. And if there needed to be money that was put on the table to help make that so, that the trust could be a funding source. And so during the course of negotiations, which occurred in earnest earlier this year, there are things that we wanted. We wanted, for example, there to be a cash donation from Novo to help address the traffic concerns at the intersection of Baker Ave and Main Street, and there was $100,000 that they put on the table from that. During those negotiations, we had a long punch list of concerns which they addressed, and one specifically that we were quite fond of was to get Novo's voluntary compliance with the town's fossil fuel-free bylaw. Because, frankly, the bylaw had not been fully enacted until April 2024's town meeting, in fact, and has only taken effect since July. And since Novo's application was filed a year before that, and therefore their application was not subject to the bylaw, we got them to agree to voluntarily to be subject to it, and that was written into all of the conditions that we came up with were written into the decision that the Zoning Board of Appeals rendered. So I think it allowed us to have a meaningful input on that project, making it as good as we think it is. We won't be able to achieve that outcome with every project, but we were pleased with how it happened with Novo.
No, thank you for that history. And of course, it's a very controversial project. You mentioned that the residences at Thoreau, which you're already counting in the housing inventory, but it's a long way from getting finalized and permitted. I like the idea of having leverage, and that's what you've done with the Novo project. The town used those funds properly for leverage to get a better project, and so it seems like that might be a use of housing funds in the future. Is that fair to say? That sort of thing?
Yes, I think that first off, it gets their attention.
Yeah.
It gets us discussing ways that a project can be better. If there, we know there are things going on in the community that may either present themselves or ones that will explore how we can make things better. We don't have specific information. For example, I know that there's 12 acres across from Emerson Hospital that's been purchased by the owner of Newbury Court. And I don't know what will come from that, what their use would be there, or if they'll be amenable to having affordable units if they're building any. All I know is that I have my own history, again, as a town manager in Provincetown, of negotiating directly with New England Deaconess Association, who we enticed to come to Provincetown to build us a $20 million facility. That we used CPA funds to subsidize. It ended up being a total of 9 affordable units in an 80 assisted living project back in the day at a cost of $100,000 per affordable unit.
Yeah.
Prices have gone up, I know.
Yeah, just personal perspective, the Thoreau project may need similar attention in the future, Keith. I don't mean to hog it, but one other question, it's more of a bookkeeping question. The 240,000 that was returned to the fund from the Thoreau project, was it just unused? Was that part of the funds that was unused, or was that the entire amount? What is maybe it's a question more.
It was from my looking into it. It was there was a $300,000 appropriation back in the day, of which $60,000 was expended, and by the end of the project, the 240 remaining was not needed to complete it. I think it was by having Habitat for Humanity being brought into it, probably reduced the overall project cost to the point it was not needed.
Yeah, I believe, Paul, some of that money was probably expended on permitting and design work, and then Habitat came in and took over the project, as I vaguely recall.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Keith.
Okay. I'm just mindful that we are about 25 minutes into Mr. Bergman's presentation. We've got a couple more hands raised. Eve, your questions.
Yeah, thank you, Keith, for this, again, amazing application, completely, thoroughly detailed out where the CPC money is going, and for your super informative presentation, which I actually screenshot a couple times so I could look at that stuff later. Appreciate it. I have 2 really quick questions. The first one, you could tackle them or not tackle them as you see fit. The first one is, does the trust ever get involved in money for maintenance or rehabilitation of affordable units to keep them affordable going forward? I know that recidivism of housing sometimes happens, and then they just sort of get run down over time. And my second question is, what, if you know anything about this, what is done to keep the affordable housing we're creating deed restricted across multiple buyers over time, so that the units that you're busy creating now in this very complicated way, which is so glad that you're doing it, are maintained as affordable housing going forward?
Great questions, and I can answer both of them. First, I'll answer the second question first, and how do we keep the units countable on the SHI, and that is I would say, the principal function of the Regional Housing Services Office existence. It was formed by intermunicipal agreement with half a dozen towns, I forget if it was 10, 15 years ago. And because I went through the same process in Littleton, where we formed another group, that none of our individual towns had the capacity or the expertise to make sure the deed restrictions were all in place, that they were all being complied with, doing making sure that any renters continue to qualify for the rentals. And so all of that work is done for each of the member towns, including Concord, by the Regional Housing Services Office. And I remember being shocked into that back when I was in Provincetown. We were reading the Cape Cod Times one time about a unit that was on the Mid-Cape, I won't mention which town, which suddenly was sold, and the town knew nothing about it and what happened. And it kind of pointed that none of the towns individually have the capacity to monitor those units. So collectively we do it. The first question on helping to maintain the quality of affordable units, we don't use CPA funds for it, but we using non-CPA funds, the trust underwrites the CHDC's so-called small grant program, which I believe has been in existence for about 11 years. We've been funding them now for 2. And that the statistic eludes me, but I think it's like 100 and something units that they've been able to maintain over that time. So,
Great, thank you.
there is that program that folks can
That's
go
awesome.
to CHDC to apply for.
And Keith, am I right? Sort of on their first point, there were affordable housing units that were created in Concord historically that had a limited period of restriction, but now it appears to me that when we invest in affordable units, they've got a permanent deed restriction. Is that fair?
Yes, that's
that
correct. That all of the deed restrictions we do now are in perpetuity. And not only that, but when the opportunity arises, we are, at least on a couple of occasions I can think of, that Liz Russ from RHSO has brought to us an updated deed restriction form, which now a universal rider, I think it's called, which the town wasn't using 30 years ago, but did start using in over the last many years. And as the opportunity arises, we are buying down in fact, we spent $38,000 on one project where we perfected the
restriction.
The deed restriction
Yeah.
by use of $38,000 to
I see.
upgrade it for the.
Right. And Eve, for your awareness, the CPC has funded in prior cycles, essentially rehabilitation, improvement, repair work for some CHA units, where it's less, it's a little bit different if there's a deed restriction that, the unit is effectively in private ownership, but it's got a deed restriction in terms of the affordability and how it gets sold. But the CHA housing, which is owned by CHA, we've funded repairs to make that so that it is ideally indistinguishable from any other housing stock in town. Mr. Kameza, Bill, I think you had your hand raised, or no?
No, I did
Okay.
not. Nope.
Okay. Okay. Let me then ask, does anybody else have any questions for Mr. Bergman? Okay. Keith, thank you for all the information. Thanks for all the information you provide to us via your emails throughout the year, following up on various matters. It's most appreciated, and your time this evening. With that, just to move things along, I will move to Anne. I believe you have the floor. I believe we're now going to be talking about Community Preservation Act administrative funds. You want to walk us through where we stand on that?
Yes, sure.
Thank you.
You fund this every year, of course. This is what helps keep the CPC operating. By the Community Preservation Act, you're allowed to appropriate 5% of the total annual revenue for administrative purposes. such as salaries and office expenses, contractual services, legal fees, and the annual dues to the Community Preservation Coalition, and they provide great advice, to us and whenever we reach out to them. So since the town of Concord typically receives about 2 million in total annual revenue, you're allowed to allocate approximately 100,000 for administrative support. Typically it's been much less than that. This year we're asking for 50,000. Since really the appropriations in the past haven't really covered the actual cost of running the CPA, so we thought that it would make sense to try to really figure out how much it does cost to make this happen. And just you all know what you do every day and what sort of support you need. But just as a reminder, there are 50 open projects currently. They're totaling over 5.3 million. And of course, you just received, was it 1.5 million in additional requests. Last year, we had to develop, 17 different memoranda of understanding and grant agreements, since there were so many applications last year, and each one is unique. Some of them are straightforward, but last year there were a few complicated ones where, there are, multiple owners and leases and, lots of, state land, private groups, town rights of way. And so it's more complicated than it seems. And of course and sort of, thinking all of this through with you has been a great experience. Plus, of course, there's the, just the regular administrative support and clerical support that make sure that the meetings happen and everyone is.
Got it.
Sure that, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Anne. And I just want to actually take a moment to note that Nancy has joined us. And Nancy, I think your email said you were recusing yourself from the affordable housing discussion, but I presume if you want to introduce yourself as so that we know you're present, and you are muted at the moment, Nancy.
Double sorry. Nancy Nelson, representative from the Historical Commission.
Great, thanks. Now, Anne, this is always a budget item that flies right through. The committee has always felt like we're very well supported by the town, and we're very fortunate to be one of the town committees that has town staff support. With that said, what I would like to know is how much, this is reflected in the cost is reflected in essentially the receipts that we incur, right? When I look at the breakdown of this, I believe there's staff salary $34,000, our dues $4,500, legal technical consulting services $8,500, and supplies CPA signage $3,000. I am surprised that the legal fee is only $8,500. I would expect, because I'm aware that we get a significant amount of input from town council leading up to town meeting, reviewing the various proposals, answering questions. I'm actually surprised that that number is what it is. I don't know if we're spending any money on signage lately. We talked a little bit about that at Giroux Park, but I'm wondering if we're actually spending $3,000. And then I guess I'm wondering about, the salary component. Is that something that is actually, I'm a little sensitive. I'll just lay my cards on the table. I'm a little sensitive to CPC or the CPA Act funds becoming another mechanism for essentially general funds, right? About pushing expense, whether it's school-related expenses, maybe staff-related expenses, or whatever, onto CPA Act funding, which is generally intended for a very specific purpose. But in the times of expensive middle schools and the like, FinCom might want to see some of that cost get pushed over to the CPA surcharge. So I'm just wondering, how do we account for that staff funding, which it might otherwise be accounted for out of the general budget? Is there actually bookkeeping that reflects that?
Oh, of course, right there, and there's the notice of planting clause too, and that's written into the Community Preservation Act, so it's actually illegal to, supplement someone's salary for already
Right.
an existing position. So, for example, if it were you couldn't use it to cover a portion of the salary of someone in the finance division, unless that person is dedicated to your committee, right? So it's really just for one position, and it happens to be me. So it's a little bit awkward for me to be defending my own position here. But
Of course, it is a super awkward position, and I don't mean to sort of put you on the spot. I guess I'm just wondering, and again, this is always has the strongest support because the committee has always felt very fortunate to have the staff support that we do, including your support, Anne. I guess I'm just wondering, like, how it's accounted for, and in part because for a long time we paid $30,000 a year, and I got the feeling that there was no accounting. Right. I mean, it was $30,000. And then they came to us and said, actually, we're spending a lot more on CPC than $30,000. We just haven't really trued it up. And now we're seeing more of a trued up number. And I guess I'm just wondering if that is actually now reflecting actual costs a little more than it was in the past. Because previously, I think we were getting, frankly, we were getting kind of a steal. I don't think they were actually charging us for town council's costs in terms of reviewing our that was just going into sort of the general legal bucket. Those weren't being directly allocated to us. And so I just want to make sure that as we've now seen the cost go from 30,000 to 50,000 in the course of about the last 4 years, which is a pretty big increase. But understandably, again, because I don't think we were actually, the accounting wasn't actually being done before. That's why I'm digging into these particular questions.
right, it's I'm not actually tracking the hours that I spend on CPC, but it is based on a portion of my salary. And you asked about the signs and things. I think it's good to have a budget for the signs, since they are there are no more signs. So I think we will need to order some more signs.
Okay.
And other things too. So it's good to have contingency funds too. Yeah.
Okay. Nancy, you had your hand raised.
I would just say that I was a little surprised at how low the staffing figures were, and I might say, and maybe you should keep track of your hours by the committees that you support, because the committees you support are CPC as well as the Historical Commission, somewhat surprisingly, takes up a lot of your what?
Yeah, and the Historic Districts Commission.
Yeah, and the Historic Districts Commission. So I'm trying to see, I think it's a good question. If you're keeping track of your time, I know professionally for projects, we would do that in the private sector, but and it might not be hard. It might be to the benefit of CPC's request. And also on legal and technical consulting services, I agree that might be low, but I don't have the facts and figures on that. But I'm thinking in particular about the request of the Historical Commission to have an archaeological survey of some type at the location for the permanent memorial. And there had been no thought about that on the part of the subcommittee, and it fell to the Historical Commission to bring up the potential for archaeological resources that were going to be impacted by the preliminary concept plan that so far they have. So that might go up sometime. And in the past, I've often thought that CPC could use more professional assistance in evaluating some of these very complex things.
And
That's
I
it.
will, and I will say that where I see the money gets spent, or what I would assume is the money gets spent, is as in years where we have complicated projects. So like this year, we might have questions about spending recreation funds on a school property, right? And so we will need input likely, if the committee directs it, the input likely on from town council on how we can do that. Though we did that last year and we got their approval on that last year. But just knowing how how legal fees spin up, I just want to make sure that that's being accounted for properly. John, you're patiently waiting.
Oh, and did we spend, was it 40 last year or 45?
Let's see. I put it up on the website here. Let me see. I don't have the number offhand.
Well, did we spend it all? Did you spend it all?
I don't think we did. I don't have it offhand, but I can get that to you next time.
No, I just didn't know if it comes back to us like other grants or it carries
doesn't.
over.
No, this is one of the ones that it actually, well, it goes back into the general fund.
Oh, okay.
The general
CPC fund.
No, I think it doesn't come back to the CPC.
Well, if it's CPC, it needs to, right?
It must.
Right,
Yeah.
it does go back to the CPC fund, but it does not get carried over from year to year. So it automatically goes back, unlike all of the other projects which continue from year to year.
Okay.
Oh,
And then,
interesting.
and then do the dues change from year to year, and are they different from different towns?
The dues have been pretty steady, and I don't have the answer as to whether they vary from different towns.
Okay. Thank you.
Questions? Bill.
Oh.
Bill, you're on mute. Start over.
There we go. So, Anne, how did you come to the amount of money for the attorney's fees? How was that? How did you get to that amount?
Right. A couple of years ago, I did ask them specifically, how many hours did you put in and what was the cost? And so they gave us a number, which I don't have in front of me.
Okay.
And the cost did exceed what was left in the budget. But we basically paid them what we could out of the CPC budget, and the town covered the rest of it. But then
So this year's projection is based on last year's expenditures.
Right, probably 2 years ago. I didn't ask them when I put together this application, but I did the year prior.
Okay.
And Bill, I would venture to say that it probably varies a lot from year to year. I would expect this year we will come in under budget because of just the very small number of applications we have, and we don't have any significant issues. In past years, we've had more complicated questions like, can we be, can we be supporting a project which is affiliated with a religious group and different things like that, where there were much more thorny issues, and also just overall do the application process. Once we come up with our list, that list is sent to outside counsel to confirm that the funding is appropriate under the Community Preservation Act. Sometimes there are edge cases, and we've got some back and forth with the town council. This year, I suspect it's going to be a pretty quick review, and we're going to see some of that money come back. And but what we're looking at here is a little bit of a legacy of at least when in the early years I was on the CPC. So let's go back maybe 4 years. I don't think any of the legal costs were actually allocated to the CPC. The town was just eating them, and it had been year after year after year. We just had a flat $30,000 line item, if I'm not mistaken. And for long timers, Judge Grassley, anybody else might remember better than me. They just said, here's $30,000, and everybody was pretty, pleased that it was a very small percentage compared to what was allowed under the act. And then there was a moment where, maybe it was under Diane's stewardship, where she said, listen, we should be paying what we're costing. and they took a better look at, and our current town manager, maybe having been the prior finance, the head of finance, he took a look at it and said, well, you guys are actually have this much staff expense and this much legal expense, and it's been essentially trued up, which is why we've seen a big jump in the last 3 years.
Yeah, good.
That's it. Any other questions?
No.
Okay, if that brings us through the presentations from our applicants for the evening. One thing I wanted to touch on, I think an email went out, and Anne, I don't know if you've gotten a response on this, is whether we could move a meeting, and I know we've got another agenda item. I just want to make sure I don't forget this. Move the meeting from, what was it, the 22nd to the 29th or something like that, to accommodate our superintendent's schedule.
That's right. Yes, there is a quorum for the 29th.
Okay.
I will just have to check with 2 of the applicants to make sure that they can also switch.
Okay, that would be great, because I know our superintendent has, a lot of commitments in the evening. So that would be great if we could accommodate that. The alternatives, which were suggested by the superintendent, was for us to all come together at about 5 o'clock or so, which is a challenge. So still have a day job and do that. Okay, so the next thing I think on the agenda was our CPC plan document. And I know we talked about that briefly at last meeting, and I think some of you have gone through that, maybe had provided some comments and updates to it. And did you circulate any updated or draft or redlined versions of that?
I posted it to the website. It was this afternoon. Sue Felshen had provided quite a lot of comments, which is great. I did get them into the document today. Most of them were very straightforward and were just about language, but there's a list of maybe 10 that really are for discussion, I think, with the group.
Okay.
Forward edits. So I don't know if you have time for that tonight, but
I will confess that I haven't had a chance to review those from this afternoon prior to this evening. What I would suggest is, Sue, or Anne, would either of you want to walk us through that by putting the document up on the screen? I don't know if Anne, you might be controlling the screen now, and Sue, if there are specific things you wanted to raise that we could take a look at. I don't want to, I know this plan is something that we've all, prior members of the committee, we've all looked at pretty closely, and to a large degree, the updates are simply to update facts and figures in it as they change year to year, and also to reflect changes, for example, like if there's a new long-range plan or something. I don't think we had any big changes like that, but hopefully these are relatively small. But Sue, can I give the table to you, the floor to you, and you walk us through some of these things?
Sure, but I will need Anne's help because she made a list of things that are proper to bring forth to the committee. So here at the bottom of this page you're seeing is the first one. I note that under the overview, item 2 here mentions the first 100,000 of taxable value of residential real property is exempted. And I tried to figure out where this $100,000 figure came from. I believe I tracked it down to 2004, and $100,000 in 2004 is about $170,000 in 2024 based on the consumer price index, which doesn't completely track with housing value, but it still seems to me like the CPC should consider putting forward a warrant article to align that number more closely to keep up with inflation.
Would that be for the CPC or the assessor, do we think?
Great question. I don't know.
So this is why, Sue, it's so good to have somebody like you on the committee that nobody's raised this before that I recall. It makes perfect sense that we would be looking at why we've got this $100,000 exemption. And in fact, if it's not indexed to inflation over time, this becomes less and less progressive, right? in contravention of the discussion that's going on around, the property tax exemption that the select board put in place.
Oh, wait a minute. I see. This is where I got 2004 from. We adopted the CPA in 2004, but I don't actually know whether that $100,000 figure comes from when we adopted it in 2004 or if it was raised at some interim time. So there's another open question.
This is
Is this outside our purview to determine this? Because seriously,
well, that's why I asked the question, is it for us or is it for the Board of Assessors or the select board to decide? But nobody else is going to suss this out, right? So I think it is for us to raise. This is
that's good.
right.
Yeah.
Somebody at some point thought that it made sense to protect the first 100,000 value in your house from the surcharge. And if that's been the case for 20 years, I mean, of course, if we raise this number, if let's say we raised it to 200,000 at this juncture, that would reduce the CPC's funding by approximately 10%, I would guess, since our median house price is about $1.1 million, 1.2, something like that in Concord. I don't know. I might take a moment to ask, let's see who we've got. I thought we had, we've got Mary Hartman. That's who I was, Mary. Can I ask you maybe as our select board chair to weigh in on your thoughts on this?
Okay, from what I learned about how we raise taxes and how we grant exemptions, we adopt Mass General laws. So we would have to look at what is the Mass General law that enabled us to enact this $100,000 exemption in the first place. So, we don't have a lot of discretion around these things. It really is what's allowed by Mass General law. So that would be the first place I would look as far as is this part of the CPC legislation or is this part of an exemption under the property taxes? But it's certainly, I can guarantee it's not up to the CPC.
Okay, it's good. Well,
but like you say, Burton, we should still take the lead in checking.
Right, because nobody else is going to identify it except for maybe the Board of Assessors. So
no, this isn't a Board of Assessors decision either. It's a policy decision and it really would be under the select board. So
okay, well, but nonetheless, it might be helpful for the select board to know if we're out of date on this number.
Okay, I can look into that.
Okay, and maybe Anne,
I'm sorry, that's assuming that the number was placed there and it is expected to rise with the rate of inflation. In other words,
no,
I don't think it was. And I think
I don't.
Yeah, so I think one has to think carefully about this because it does cut into important funds for CPC.
Right, I'm just saying this could be something that has sat there and for all we know, the law has been changed. And we haven't caught it, right? Because it could have been that somebody came back and said, well, it should be the first 200,000, all right? In this era where towns and so forth are talking about exempting a portion of your property as an affordable housing goal. I suspect it's probably stuck there at 100,000, and that it's probably the same, but it's worth checking.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a brilliant thing, Sue, for you to identified.
Well, I don't know if we need to do anything at all about it, but it just struck me that that's 20 years and
yeah, right. Or potentially 20 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Any other next up?
Hot items?
I think it's useful to stick with Ann's list of 10.
Yeah, this one seems like just a
semantics or
oh, I couldn't tell what was meant here. Right. The second sentence means that borrowing money for land acquisition projects requires a 2/3 vote. But land acquisition without borrowing only requires a simple majority. Is that what we really meant to say, given that the first sentence says are both required to spend and fund projects?
We're gonna have to raise Ann's salary here.
Is this something I could just look into, maybe in the Community Preservation Act? Maybe that's a question.
That's why we have a legal line item, right?
That too, but this is a simple matter of what does the law actually say, and then we would need to pick one of the two phrasings I offered in my comment to match whatever the heck the law actually says.
Okay.
Are you saying here, because the highlighted sentences, the first sentence says there's two exceptions to the majority vote rule, and the second sentence says if A and B exist at the same time, you need 2/3. Is that the issue? I'm not quite clear on what's the confusion. It says appropriations require a majority vote, except for land acquisitions and borrowing. And the second one says you need 2/3 majority if you borrow for a land acquisition, which is A and B.
Right. So is it A or B, or is it A and B?
Yeah, I get
the two sentences are inconsistent with each other, and we just need to figure out
it's a
which
grammar
it is
issue.
and
Yeah.
rephrase it to actually match that. So it's not
I got it.
exciting. It's just a fact-finding question.
Yeah. So Anne, I guess that's just a verification if independently, if we borrow funds or buy or acquire funds that acquire land, does that require a 2/3 vote? And that would actually be just really helpful to know going forwards, because it'll weigh into what our voting percentage is. I mean, we've never borrowed funds that I'm aware of, but we certainly have acquired land, and it would be good to know that whether we need a 2/3 vote on that independently, or whether it's the borrowing that triggers it.
Sorry.
And does that make sense?
It will. I need to read through it.
Yeah, if you look at the second sentence, it suggests that both of those things need to be true, that we're borrowing money to buy land, and that's what requires a 2/3 vote. Is it that both those things need to be present, or is it one or the other, that we're either borrowing money or buying land requires a 2/3 vote? I get why Sue's, the first sentence creates a little confusion about the second. And I suspect it's actually, we need a 2/3 vote in either of those cases, because both of those things are a little bit extraordinary for towns to do in terms of borrowing money or buying land.
Burton, does the CPC borrow money?
We have the authority to do so, but to my knowledge, we never have. I think that, that comes up often in the land acquisition context, but we've never done that, to my knowledge. My knowledge being, maybe 20% of the history of the CPC in Concord.
But we do acquire land, so we really need to know, do we need a 2/3 vote for that, or do we only need it if we're borrowing money to buy the land? Yeah.
Or Carmen needs to know that, or vote at town meeting, right? Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
There were a lot of housing questions. There were 3 on this page.
You are no longer sharing the screen, Anne.
Yep.
I'm sorry. Let me bring it back up. Okay, can you see it now?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think I understood this one. I just adopted that, and then here we go.
Oh, this was some phrasing that made it sound like non-perpetuity units don't count on the SHI, even while they are under their temporary restriction.
In Massachusetts. And
is that really what we mean, or did we just phrase it wrong?
I think that, didn't he just to say that all housing they're acquiring now does have this deed restriction in perpetuity?
Yeah, but that was not historically the case. We've had, there have been affordable housing that's been invested in by the town that's been it's had a deed restriction for like 20 years or 30 years, and it actually rolls off. I think that likely this sentence would be accurate if we just deleted the words in perpetuity, because the unit is either on the SHI or it's not, and if it rolls off, it's, it
It's
rolls
all-
off.
But I agree, if we can delete in perpetuity and make it accurate, that seems the simplest solution. But I raised it as a question because I wasn't sure.
I think you're right that it doesn't need to be in perpetuity to be considered unless the law has changed. I think we currently probably count housing units towards our limit that are not restricted in perpetuity. I think there are probably a handful that remain. And do we have Keith still on Keith? Do you happen to know the answer to this? If you haven't.
Yeah, yes, it's correct that there can be and there are units that are not restricted in perpetuity and that can get counted on the SHI.
Okay, thank you. So then I think, Sue, the fix this sentence is to delete the words in perpetuity.
Yep, sounds great.
Then I guess I just need to research the numbers a little bit more. Is that what you're saying here?
Okay, so the 2023 plan said the estimated area-wide median income is 140,000 some, and the 80% figure was 111,000. But then this one says that it's about 100. The updated plan says it's about 106,000, which is lower than 111,000. And how can the median income have gone up, but the 80% figure have gone down? This seems like some kind of math problem. See, the first line says that the area-wide median income is 149,000. So how can that have gone up, but the 80% level have gone down?
I'm going to guess the 80% number may have been overlooked for a year or two in terms of updates to this document.
Well, that's possible. And math is not my strong suit, but even this was simple enough for me to wonder if we should check into and confirm.
Yeah. So, Anne, if you could just confirm these numbers, and maybe Keith, if you have up-to-date numbers on what these are. I don't know if these are numbers you have close at hand. That would be helpful, obviously. Okay.
Oh, right. There was some horrible math problem or language problem here about the Peter Bulkley units. But I think it was just a phrasing issue.
Go fix those. And then I think this was the one. Oh, no, never mind.
So that sentence right there, since 2013, Concord has a net add of 2 units on the SHI composed of adding 21 units and losing 11 units at the confidential DDS homes. And I mean, that sentence itself seems to need a update across the board, because obviously we've added a couple of hundred units to the SHI with the inclusion of the new 40B project.
Okay.
Oh, if they're already counting, right?
They are.
Yes.
They are already counting,
Right.
because they're permitted.
All right. Okay.
So they
But
go
it
on the list.
previously said losing 19 units, 11 at the confidential, which was just garbled, and I think it was just
Right.
an editing error of some kind.
And I think this was the one I wanted to ask people about.
Oh, okay.
Is this the prior sentence the paragraph beginning with as
Yeah, the
March?
prior one, only half of those units are affordable, 80%, the rest are unrestricted.
This is going to what Keith was presenting in terms of, where we're at. We're going to be at 16%, but of that, only 7 something percent is actually So this was at March 2024, we were at 9.997%, which is that number that Keith presented. We are now up to something like 16%, but of that 16%, it's only about 7%, which are actually at, I don't know, Keith, if that was 80% of AMI or if it was 100% of AMI. But I
It
think
was the total, yeah, if I could, it's the total that's restricted between 50% and 150%. And largely the reason why there are any units on the SHI that are not restricted, it's because they are market rate rentals where the total project is a rental project with a minimum of 25% affordable. In
Right.
that case, 75% of the rentals get counted on the SHI and they are not affordable.
right, which
Okay,
is
so to what
so
Burton said, the real problem with this paragraph is it should say, as of March 2024, Concord reached 717 SHI units, or 9.997%. Only half of those units were affordable at 80% of AMI. The rest were unrestricted. As of August 2024, Concord had reached some higher number with Novo Riverside, using whatever is the appropriate month. Or simply update the numbers from March to.
I would do the latter. Yeah, but
Okay,
you're
yeah.
on the right track there. So
All right.
that we need to essentially we need to borrow Keith's presentation and update these numbers to
Mhm.
reflect I mean the whatever is essentially the publication date of this plan.
Right, both of these paragraphs, yes, need to get updated. I see your point.
All right, and then I guess under recreation, there was another one.
And certainly, well, I think, and keep scrolling, but if anybody else has any comments outside of Sue's comments, of course, you're welcome to raise them.
Yeah, I was forced to struck recently completed in reference to something that happened in 2015.
Yeah, that's good.
I have a comment on a page that we passed, and it's kind of romper room compared to Sue's skill here, but I thought I might bring it up. It's on page 8. Just the last, it's explanation of fiscal year sources for available CPA funds, which was page 8. A little bit further back, I think.
Page this.
Keep going a little bit further back. The pages are not lining up on the screen as they do in a printout, but okay, there. That revenues of the current fiscal year 24 year are not part of the 2024 annual town meeting vote. In fact, the major portion of forecasted current year has already been committed in support of the appropriations. I thought at one point we were trying to make this document less needing of annual updating. And so I was going to recommend that we just strike that whole paragraph at the end, not only because it's kind of confusing to me, but it also refers, it would have to get updated each year, I think. That was my thought.
Okay.
What do you think, Sue?
Well, it's a worthy goal to make it easier for us and town staff, especially not to have to update everything all the time. But I don't really have an opinion about how important this sentence is, this paragraph.
I think the first paragraph here under this section explains what you need to know.
Right, exactly.
I think we delete it because it is something that's it's just administrative time
Right.
to update these things. I mean, there's for example, I will say, I think everybody who served on this committee has struggled to figure out like when our funds are determined based upon what fiscal year, when we vote them in at town meeting, and when those funds are accessible. So it is helpful to have the example, which is in this third paragraph, but I think we can get rid of the fifth paragraph.
Yeah,
The example will always be true, no matter how old it
Right.
gets.
Yeah.
So back,
So you got that, Ann?
yes, yes. I got
Okay,
it. Yep.
thanks for that input, Eve.
Where are we? Oh, too far. Sorry. So, and forgive me. I'm just not-
And
Yes.
what Sue's question there was actually, I think, I had made a change. The sentence should read recreational facilities at the high school, the Concord Carlisle High School, are shared, well, my edit, I'll go back to that, was recreational facilities of the Concord Carlisle High School are utilized by residents of both towns. That was the edit.
Okay.
Somehow that got, so it's referring to the recreational facilities of CCHS are utilized by residents of both towns. That's what that should read.
Okay. Oh, I think I had updated it to read that way. That's what I guessed, and I just wanted to be sure. And then something about the fields. I don't know if this is. Should we? Sue had asked whether phase 3 is still pending or has it happened? Does anyone have the answer to that?
1.8 fields in Yuma and for the high school is part of phase 3 of the current field renovation plans.
Like what current field renovation plans? If there are any ongoing now, I don't know about them, but I don't really follow that sort of thing. So I just flagged it to check.
I believe there is consideration of future athletic field improvements at the high school. I don't know whether that's technically phase 3 of any project or if that's just a new endeavor.
I think that's sure. And there are the soccer, the skating park area.
Yeah. I mean, I think people are looking at that, be it a track or another field or what have you, but I don't know if that's phase 3 of anything.
Yeah, I just couldn't tell if this was old language that is outdated or
I
if this is
suspect
still
it is.
current.
Yeah.
Similar to what was before.
Will generally not recommend that town meeting appropriate for expenses incurred by a application. Yeah,
Prior
that's
to
interesting.
receiving an application, don't we mean prior to the town meeting approving an application? Why does it say CPC receiving?
Well,
actually, I think it's wrong as a matter of law. I don't think we can fund anything that expenses that are incurred prior to the actual approval of the appropriation. We've looked at this recently.
So shouldn't we change it to town meeting approving instead of CPC receiving?
Well, no, it should be, it's not, will generally not recommend. It's that I'm not exactly sure.
Well, no, we can, because see, then on the top of the next page of the paragraph, he goes on to say the CPC may waive this in case of certain emergency things.
I don't know. Gosh, Anne, in the context of where we discussed this around, do I have the street number right? 31 Walden?
Concord Players.
The Concord Players, we talked about how they couldn't incur the expense prior to the appropriation and approval at town meeting. I guess in that context, we weren't talking about land acquisition.
And sudden acquisition of land where there was some major problem about waiting. Yeah. I thought I saw something else earlier in this, in the CPA enabling legislation, maybe about there is an exception relating to acquisition of land that must be done in short order. But then I'm not sure about this thing about if such a project is the focus of ongoing or pending active fundraising. But
I don't think
Sure,
how
not-
that would,
I'm confused. There's the two issues here. One is receiving an application and the other one is approving the appropriation.
Yeah.
I think those are both true. Certainly the first one we can't, but can they both be waived?
it doesn't make any sense to me, Paul.
we
Like,
couldn't waive something regarding an application we haven't yet received.
That's
Mary, I
Because
see
we
your
wouldn't
hand
know
up.
what to waive.
I thank you, Burton, but I can't weigh in on this. I'm not here to participate in this conversation. I wanted to circle back to the $100,000 exemption conversation earlier.
Okay, can I table? I'll come back to
Absolutely.
you momentarily. Sorry.
Absolutely.
Okay, so on this one, I'm confused how we can talk about not having a requirement that we hadn't received an application for.
yes.
That doesn't even make any sense.
No.
Well, actually, Burton, maybe the Concord Players is an excellent example because they had all that HVAC work done before they even came to us for money. And then they basically said, we have this enormous list of things to do. And some of it we have to do before we even get appropriated the funds, but we will only ask for money for things that are coming after the appropriation. And they listed painting and whatnot, right?
Right, and they had to do their
Yeah.
own private fundraising for the things that they spent money on before the funding was approved.
Yeah, but it wasn't the receipt of the application wasn't the trigger. It was approval of the funding at town meeting.
Right.
We said you couldn't spend money until it'd been approved at town meeting.
That's what we told them.
Right, and it's
That's-
the same thing this year for the Thoreau Elementary School, that they want to do several things. And they said that they want to do part of it early next summer that they would use private fundraising for. And they're asking us for money for something that they couldn't start work on until after the funding gets approved, if it does.
So it's not even the CPC approving the application, it's the town meeting voting to accept the application and the project, right?
Yeah.
Right, so here, shouldn't we change CPC receiving to town meeting approving? And then separately, there might be some question about the next sentence. I'm not sure if we can waive the requirement if the project is the focus of ongoing or pending active fundraising, but
Is this
But-
standard CPC language from other towns too, though?
I'm not sure. I could check.
Hmm.
I think this sentence needs some serious rewriting
Right,
in line with the act itself.
right.
the second sentence under P.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Perhaps even the first sentence too, because there's something going on there that we're not capturing yet. I'm not sure what it is, why that was put in there. If it's from other towns, some town could very well have been pressuring for some project and say, well, of course you can get CPC funding if we approve of this, and put and ask the CPC committee to say something at a town meeting. I don't know what that's coming from, but it'd be worth researching it.
Well, we have said over and over to applicants, no, you can't spend money and then ask us to reimburse you for money already spent before town meeting voted. So it seems like it's attempting to express that idea.
So why not just say that?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, this seems like we're going round and round over something that we all agree is simpler.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Maybe the CPC will not recommend town meeting appropriate CPA fundings for expenses occurred prior to CPC recommendations or something.
You know, prior to town meeting
Sorry,
voting funds. But there is this thing about the CPC may waive the requirement. I could swear I saw that somewhere in the enabling
Maybe you should figure
legislation.
that quotation out and bring that back.
Mm.
Perhaps if you're not sure about that, maybe we should get that straight.
Mm.
Okay, so then there was just one final one and it was down at the end. Where are we? Oh, right. So, Sue is looking at the bylaw itself and saying it might need an update at some point.
But I mean, it's not a major thing, but we don't have a board of selectmen anymore. We have a select board.
Oh, I give up.
So I did not make these changes, but I just thought that was something that should be brought up to the committee. And I did notice, I think it's actually written into the bylaw that every 5 years, the CPC should look at the bylaw and see whether it does need updates. But
Every 5 years, that sounds great.
I wish that
we could leave it to some later year. I'm just saying that someday when this bylaw gets updated, those things should get fixed.
There you go.
Here it is.
I wonder, would it not be the purview of, I mean, the bylaw of the select board, or, to fix this more generally, I could imagine a town meeting vote that says wherever the bylaws say Board of Selectmen, that it shall now say the select board, because this is going to be true through umpteen, bylaws, sections of the bylaws of the town.
Yeah, and every committee and commission has
Right.
that, which still it's obsolete. Everybody knows it. It should be fixed.
Do most of them even have a bylaw? Lots
Yes.
of them.
We have charges, we have guidelines, there are all kinds of things that use outdated language that everybody knows is obsolete.
Well, sure, but it struck me that a bylaw was a little different from a charge. However, I'm not going to demand that we go fix it right now.
I'm not prepared to debate that. Sorry.
Having just completed my "How would you prefer town meeting to be run" survey, I think it would be great if we were able to do this with one fell swoop, rather than do it on a committee by committee basis.
Line by line basis.
There were a couple of other little things in there that ought to get changed, incorrect words or typos, but none of them were of dire importance.
Okay. Let me Mary, I'm going to use this opportunity to come back. Do you know if there was, when we changed the name from the Board of Selectmen to the Select Board, whether there was any consideration of doing a general update to the town's bylaws?
I don't know where we officially changed that name. It might have just been in the popular vernacular. I don't know. Yeah.
Okay.
Really, I don't think there was any official act to change that.
Okay, all right, which doesn't surprise me. We've all got a lot going on.
Right.
With that, now that I've turned to you, you wanted to raise a point previously that you've been holding on to.
Yeah, it appears that the $100,000 exemption was something that we adopted. It's enabled by the Mass General Law 44B, Chapter 3, Section 3B. It's a local option that gives each community, when they adopt the CPC Act, the local option to enable this $100,000 exemption. We voted to enable that. So that's baked into the enabling legislation, and that hasn't changed.
Okay.
Well,
That's
then
very
we're
helpful.
set. We don't need to do anything.
Right. Very good.
Unless we want to, bring forward something, what is that when you have to go before the general court to get one of your local bylaws?
I believe what it's called is hopeless.
There we go. Yes, we won't be doing that. Not on my watch. Eve, that's for you next year to
Oh,
get that
God.
number changed for the General Court of Massachusetts. Okay. Thank you very much for Sue, as for your close attention to this and going through and providing all your feedback. I think we are now at the end of the agenda for the evening. I'm just going to double check, go back, review the other business. So any public comment that we have this evening? We've got a few non-committee members on the line. Give you a second to come off mute if you've got any public comment. Kathy, I see you turned on your video. Are you getting? No public comment. Okay. All right. Well, hearing none. Thank you all for your attention. And you'll let us know if we're able to move that meeting out from the 22nd to the 29th, I think. Is that our next meeting, or are we meeting next week as well?
I think we're going to aim for the 29th to be the next meeting.
Okay.
and-
Okay. So in 3 weeks' time. Okay. Very good. Thanks for everybody's attention. Thank you to our applicants tonight for presenting and for the good questions from the committee. I appreciate it very much.
Thanks all.
With that, we'll adjourn. Thank you.
night.
Have a good evening.